Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So, in the past weeks, I've been talking about practices that I've called monastic practices, but they're spiritual practices, and whether you are a monastic or not, they're the same practices. Everything that we do here in the Zendo is the same practice that is done in the monastery. So that division between what is monastic and what is lay practice really does not, it's very filmy. Essentially, someone who is a monastic lives in the monastery and has a commitment to full day's practice on a particular schedule. And so we, although we do monastic practices, we're not really a monastery here. We are a Zen center. But again, what we do here in the Zendo is monastic. Same as is done in the monastery. So the one that I wanted to talk about tonight, because there are many of them, and they are most interesting, I think, and are very beautiful practices. And the one I want to talk about tonight, it's wandering. When you receive the Buddha's robes, you become an unsui. Will, for instance, here is an unsui. And unsui means wandering cloud. And the idea, well, let me talk about wandering first before I talk about the kind of wandering I want to talk about. I want to talk about what kind of wandering we are not talking about. So we're not talking about mind wandering or wandering around in life, wondering what one should do or where one should live or living in a state of confusion. That it's not that. And it's not the wandering of migrants, or let's say even the wandering of the Jews after the destruction of the Second Temple, looking for a home and wanting a place to be able to live in peace. It is not that kind of wandering either. Not the wandering of migrants or the homelessness. There's a very specific kind of wandering. And it is essentially a letting down of the ego and one's own assumptions about life and allowing the Dharma to instruct and lead one in one's life, to find one's way in one's life in the Dharma. Of course, famously, Unsui would go from one temple to another, seeking the teachings of different teachers. And so that certainly is recorded in history, and it's done to some degree today, but not as much as we read in our texts, in our historic stories, and certainly in the koans. There's a great deal of that kind of wandering, seeking out the teaching of other teachers other than one's root teacher. So that wandering is also embedded with the idea of wise discernment, as we have been talking about, and the practice of threshold, of understanding and knowing when one is moving through a threshold. Threshold practice is very, very interesting and awakening. And all day long we move through thresholds. every time we pass through a doorway, that's a threshold. But it's not just because of the doorway itself. It's because the atmosphere changes once we move through a doorway. We even go through thresholds when we are driving a car. We go through areas where we drive, and the atmosphere changes if we are aware of it. From this drive, say, to downtown, that section where we pass through Priest Point Park is a threshold area. It's tree-covered. It's sort of almost cave-like, and it has a particular atmosphere very different from when one just goes past the park and begins the drive where the residences are. All day long we are passing through them, and very often we're not aware of the thresholds. We just go when we are oblivious to the atmosphere changes. But the practice of being aware of those is quite enlivening, and helps us to get a respect for where we are and the surroundings we are in and the people we are with in those threshold changes. There's a shift if you enter the library. I mean, you just feel the atmosphere shift. If you enter the post office, that's another threshold pass. Any place where you go, entering a store, coming out of the store, all thresholds. And so being aware of those presences in those particular spaces and places are part of daily practice. And wise discernment in the wandering is a very key point also, because one as a wandering monk or a layperson who has received the precepts, who moves into a different place of practice and say a more not defined, but a deeper space of practice, will look toward wise discernment, wisely would look for the practice of wise discernment within that sense of letting go of one's ego to discover one's life in the Dharma, and to deeply be with what we are presented with in that walking through, in that walking, wandering. So the unsui is not just for monks. It's for anyone. When we take the precepts, we wear rakusu, our life shifts in the Dharma. It deepens, and we have deeper roots, and we have a deeper way of seeing when we wear rakusu. So those same practices are there for everyone, not just for one who wears okesa, the large robe. Of course, when one wears the large robe, it is a deeper commitment. There's no doubt about that. And so, but the practices remain the same. One wears the deep robe. Zazen is the same for all of us. And how we address our lives, how we walk through the threshold, how we practice wise discernment is the same. Whether you wear rakusu or not, it's the same. Your zazen is the same, even if you don't wear rakusu. But this particular kind of wandering is very particular in Zen. In medieval times in Christianity, the Celtic monks, not the Celtic monks, well, I guess the Celtic, they were just the monks who would do this. they would get, it's a pretty scary practice, I couldn't imagine doing such a thing, but they would get into a boat, a large rowboat, say, and they would leave behind the oars, and there was no keel to direct the boat in any way, and they would just push off into the water, and they would rely upon their trust in God to land them in the place where they were going to bring their preaching to that place. And hopefully you didn't just get washed out to the ocean. But in the Celtic area, I suppose they would be in the Channel, or they would be in the Irish Sea, or someplace like that, where you would be bounded by land on either side, so you would have to wash up on one of the shores of the islands. But that was the practice. That to me is pretty scary. I don't think I could do such a thing. But that was the Celtic practice for monks in medieval times. The boat had a particular name, but I don't remember the word for it. But that kind of, a similar kind of wandering, where one simply trusts that one will be directed in the Dharma toward the right place and the right way of practice. And so there isn't a personal directing of oneself. That is gone. One allows the Dharma to lead one in that kind of wandering. Different from pilgrimage, in which there is a point at which one is intended to reach, and one has specific practices along the way of a pilgrimage. So the wandering is very, very different, a very different texture to it. And we are so used to ordering our lives and determining what our goals are and where we want to go and what we want to do and what we think is right for us and so forth. And Unsui doesn't exactly have that prerogative. That is given up as one leaves home. So although we might be lay people, and we don't exactly leave home, at the same time, there is always a space we keep between at home and practice. If we give up that space and we just do at home, we lose the sense of practice entirely. So we have to reserve a little tiny space so that we are aware of practice within the realm of home. And we don't lose that connection with our place of practice. We may have a place of practice at home too. Hopefully we do. But we keep a connection to our Zen center or our temple. And there's just a little space always to remind us of what that practice is. So even if it's rakasu that we wear, there's that little leaving home, a little tiny bit of leaving home, so that we remember the Buddha's precepts. We remember that we sit zazen. We remember our ethical life wherever we go. So I don't have lots more to say about this, but it's in the center of wise discernment and in the center of threshold practice, these two are sort of underpinnings of the wandering. Because we become aware as we cross the threshold where the Dharma is, where we are in relationship to that, where we presence ourselves as we cross a threshold. And that presencing is deeply there in the practice of wandering, so that we receive the Dharma in every activity. We listen for the Dharma. We see the Dharma in every activity, and it is that exactly which leads us. So maybe you have some questions about this. It's difficult to describe, and at the same time, it's part of our practice. It's part of Zen practice. Yeah.
So I think I recently came across the idea that in all like the realms of becoming, like in the Tibetan wheel of becoming, each realm has an archetype of the Bodhisattva.
Mm-hmm.
And it is in the human realm that the archetype of the Bodhisattva is the wanderer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel like I haven't gotten that one.
Yeah. Oh, it's very subtle.
But this idea of like relationship, like we don't know that we're practicing in the home if that's all that there is, because it just becomes like a blob.
We say that, start off with that again.
It's like that
at home.
You're to your point of reserving some space.
Yeah.
Of practice outside of the home is sort of what informs our practice in the home.
Sure.
Because of that
Yes.
dynamic and that relationship.
Yes. Yes.
But I sort of understood the archetype of the Bodhisattva as the wanderer to kind of be about that this realm is so transient and that there really is nothing to hold on to.
Yeah.
It's sort of my impression.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing that there's like a larger relationship at play, because that just seems such a negative argument. It's sort of framing the Bodhisattva as what isn't.
I must have a dense head tonight. Could you just describe that a little bit better? The issue for you.
Why is the archetype of the Bodhisattva a wanderer?
Because it's not a wandering around. It's maybe the relationship also of not knowing allows one. There's definitely a detached nature in the unsui, or in ordination, a detaching from regular life. And so there is some of that, I think, in it. And that one is not exactly homeless, but one leaves home. So that you don't root yourself in the family. And so you also are open to being moved where you are needed to be. You don't fix yourself someplace. Because essentially, you live your life for the sake of other beings. So that means that you might be moved from here to here to here, for whatever is needed. And I'm sure it's deeper than that too. Wandering cloud, the sense that it's wandering, the clouds are continually moving, of course. So it is that notion that we don't fix ourselves someplace. Even if you stay in the monastery your whole life, you still are not fixed there. And that everything is changing, always. And we wander with the changes. better?
Yeah, because I think that there's a certain kind of, like, there's an attachment in detachment, I would think.
There could be, but ought not necessarily be. I understand that. You know, I'm attached to being detached, so I won't attach, right?
I'm just, like, everything just sort of has that, like, that underbelly to it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is different. I don't know.
Well, I think it's a very, very subtle matter that could flip into, you know, attachment, of course. That certainly could. Detachment could flip into attached detachment.
Well, I guess, but I'm assuming it's like a healthy, naturally evolving form of attachment. Like maybe to the Dharma itself or
Sure.
something.
Yeah. I mean, we root ourselves in the Dharma. There's no doubt about that. But it's rooted in emptiness where the true root is. And you can't name that.
I want to.
You go
Maybe
ahead.
that's what this is.
Go ahead, name it. Name it. Let me hear you name it. Go ahead, give it a name.
I see the point.
Yeah, but I mean that's where the true root is. So where could you land in emptiness?
But you're already landed.
Oh, not. It's not that kind of landing. But that is the true root. So, and it can't be named, and it can't be fixed, and it is an ever chaotic fluctuation. Okay. But great questions too, to try and spin this stuff around. Yes, Bob?
I'm wondering how wandering is related to way-seeking mind, that impulse that brings us to the cushion and wandering. And
I didn't hear the word.
I'm sorry, way-seeking mind, and how is that related to wandering as we're talking about it?
Well, way-seeking mind is so deep in the unconscious that we don't really know where we're going in way-seeking mind. It's just an intuitive response to an inkling that is so deep in us that we can't exactly define. So it is exactly similar. Mm-hmm. Wandering. I mean, it is the same kind of thing.
Is it the impulse to wander?
Well, we can't. When I say wandering, I don't mean wandering around.
No, I understand.
I mean in this practice. Okay, so if we are in practice and really rooted in in emptiness, we are still in a state of wandering, in a sense, as a practice, because we never finish.
Mm.
So we can't have the idea that we landed or that we arrived. So way-seeking mind continues forever. Mm. And that is, an intuitive opening, continual opening to move and walk forward in our understanding of where the Dharma leads us.
Okay.
Speak big.
I guess what brought that to mind was you had mentioned thresholds, awareness of thresholds, and way-seeking was in a sense revealing those things,
Mm-hmm.
becoming aware of
Yes.
those thresholds.
Yes.
So that's where I was kind of coming from.
That's good.
with-
I like that. That way-seeking mind exactly becomes aware of thresholds. You become aware of... I mean, the potential to awaken is in every single moment.
Mhm.
So every threshold we go through is another potential of the expression of awakening. So it's endless.
Mm.
It isn't just once we awaken, is how it goes. So that opening, continual opening to that movement in life is way-seeking mind, and is that wandering.
Mm. Okay.
So that is good
Thank
to
you.
say that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I mean, just spend a day thinking, really being aware of the thresholds you pass through. They are in your house, from one room to the other, from your house to your car. I mean, everything. It's very exciting. Yes.
Thinking about thresholds, is every single thing, like, is there a distinction between some thresholds that are of greater importance versus everything being a threshold?
Well, I suppose some are of greater importance because maybe something really changes for us at a certain point, and we might perceive that then to be of greater importance. But every moment, of course, is of deep importance. And some, are greater than others in our lives, for certain. Some fate happens, and we are moved in a particular way. I mean, I met my teacher, fateful moment, big moment. And so I think it's fine to acknowledge that some are more pivotal in our lives than others. But once again, in the idea of our practice of awakening, every single moment is equally that Dharma position, we're calling it these days. So, yeah.
I'm thinking about the way that you spoke of allowing the Dharma to direct you.
Yes.
And I'm having a hard time aligning that with what I'm thinking about as transitions, as thresholds. Sorry, because to me a threshold is a one-way crossing versus that doesn't allow for not a decision but a variety of options through which you would allow yourself to wander.
Oh, let me think of this for a moment. Essentially, we have no choice in life. I mean, essentially, there are no choices. You walk in a direction, and that's the way you go. So, in that moment, everything there's total potential of everything. So there's no limitation on that. We may perceive it to be so, that we've left something behind, but we haven't actually, because we have a new opportunity for complete potential to open up. So it's not it's not a diminishing thing, or going through a threshold is once more opening. It's just that the universe opens wider and wider and wider, essentially what happens. So I don't see that as, I forget what words you used in that. I didn't see that as a narrowing in any way, or leaving something behind. I mean, we bring everything with us, and yet we are made fresh each moment also. So, and then again, when I speak about thresholds, we often think about it's going around wandering either. So that's the difficulty in talking about this, that moving through the threshold is the wandering is deeply within, in placing ourselves in relationship to Dharma and allowing the Dharma to be, or emptiness to be, to lead us. I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, but these are also things that we have to sit with and discern and understand them for ourselves. I'll just give you a notion, and then you have to go out and solve the problem. That's the teaching. The job of the teacher is not to answer your questions, actually. The job of the teacher is to ask questions, and then everybody else has to go and deal with them, if you choose. You can choose not to also. That's quite fine. But anyway, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Donna.
No.
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 Okay. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've been giving talks here for 20 years now. I keep trying to think up new things. Mickey agrees. I've never given the same Dharma talk twice. So I'm trying to find some new territory so I don't get too stale for my own self, because mostly if I give a Dharma talk, I have to live whatever Dharma I speak out. So I try to keep it interesting for myself. Right? Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so take with you, please, wise discernment and threshold practice, and understanding the rootedness, the deep wandering is the rootedness in Dharma. So, if we give away an absolute determined direction in our lives, if we give that away, we are left with sort of an indecisiveness. And wandering is not exactly that, but it is that place of not unsureness, but allowing. Okay?